Hey everybody, it's You Had to Ask, the show where I answer your questions, and my first question this week comes from Justin Ood, who asks, what is an embarrassing phase you've gone through? Remorse is encouraged. Oh, I've mentioned this in a few videos before previously. I don't know if I've ever talked about it in this series. I don't think I have. But it's got to be my conservative phase, my young Republican phase. When I first got into politics, when I first got really interested in politics, was when I was about 12 or 13 years old, and I was a Rush Limbaugh devotee. I had the books. I had both of Rush Limbaugh's books, The Way Things Ought to Be and See, I Told You So, and I would listen to his radio show whenever I could, and I would watch he had a television show at that point as well. I would watch that. I was just a crazy, like, young Republican conservative. And I actually mentioned it, I was thinking about it the other day because I mentioned, I put up a Facebook post where I used the word sophist or sophistry, and someone commented and said, oh, now I know what sophistry means. And it reminded me that the first time I ever heard the word sophistry was when I was 13 or 14 years old in 8th grade, and Mr. Cromwell, my English teacher, who was like my all-time favorite teacher, used the word sophistry to describe an argument that I was making. And that was the first time I'd ever heard that word. And at the time, I was like, you know, little Mr. Republican, and he was very liberal, but we just got along great, and he was by far my favorite teacher, and still is. And yeah, remorse, absolutely, but then again, understanding, because I was really young, and there was no way that I possibly could have known shit about shit. And luckily, within a few years, I had outgrown it. By the time I was 15 or 16, I had moved beyond that phase of my life, that conservative phase. Although it did still linger a bit, because when I was in my senior year of high school, we were allowed to register to vote. Like at school, they brought in the forms for us to register to vote. And I registered Republican. I changed that many years later. I realized, oh shit, I'm a Republican, and I went back and re-registered as non-affiliated. But yeah, that's it. If there's an embarrassing phase in my life, that whole conservative Republican Rush Limbaugh phase, that any other embarrassing phases I may have gone through in my life are left in the dust by that. Patrick Dodds, Steve, as an atheist, do you feel equal disdain for Eastern and Western religions, or does one slightly edge out the other? If so, why? Also, will we ever see segments on your series challenging Eastern religion and its tenets, i.e. 5 stupid things about Hinduism, 5 stupid things about Buddhism, etc.? Well, to answer that second question first, yeah, there almost certainly will be 5 stupid things about Buddhism and 5 stupid things about Hinduism at some point. I'm not sure when. I don't really have them lined up for a future edition right now, but absolutely I would like to do those at some point. I think they're ripe for the plucking. In principle, my disdain for Eastern and Western religion is the same, because ultimately my disdain for religion is rooted in the fact that it's false. It's just not true. And Eastern religion is no more or less true than Western religion. However, in practice, I would say that Western religion gets the edge over Eastern religion just because it's what I have the most experience with, it's what I've had the most contact with, and it's what has the most power and influence to control and affect my life and the course of many people's lives in the place where I live. So for that practical reason, I would give the Western religions an edge. I would say I have more disdain for them, practically speaking, but philosophically, in principle, they're the same. Gradient 14, why don't you think that smaller governments work better? Government that rules best rules least. Plus, small governments don't call for the rampant spending we have now, and reduces the idea that we need government to take care of us from cradle to grave. You know, I'm going to call you out on that whole cradle to grave thing. I think that's just misleading. I think that's a mischaracterization. When people say the government's taking care of people from cradle to grave, they're taking the existence of government services that can care for young children and can care for people in their adult life and can care for people as seniors. And they're talking about it as though there are individuals in society that are being cared for exclusively by government programs from birth all the way through life to death. And I'm not saying that there aren't such people. Perhaps there are unfortunate individuals who are so down on their luck and so destitute that they are reliant exclusively on government assistance for their entire lives. I can't say for a fact that there aren't. I don't know. I do know that there aren't very many of those people, and that most of the people that make use of government assistance in their lives do so on an extremely temporary basis, and that they would like nothing more than to improve their position in life so that they don't need that assistance any longer. This notion that people who favor government assistance, public assistance, welfare, etc., are somehow trying to hook everybody on government assistance, and they just want the government to tell us when to wipe our asses and when to drive our cars and when to do this and that. That is complete horseshit. That is absolute complete horseshit. It is a mischaracterization of reality. As is this obsession with government spending. It is not the government's job to spend the least amount of money possible. I don't know where this is a selfish, silly idea, libertarian idea for the most part, that it's government's job to save us as much money as possible. That's not government's job. Government's job is to regulate our society to make it livable for all of us, to ensure justice, to ensure peace, to ensure safety, to ensure opportunity for us to exercise our freedoms, to provide necessary services, like basic things like fire departments and police departments and roads and the military and the postal service, and also things like relief for the poor, like education, things like this. That's the government's job. Sometimes that can get expensive. Now, does that mean that there are no such things as government waste? Of course not. There are many, many instances where the government is exploited by corrupt interests, where the government spends money that it doesn't need to spend or spends too much on one thing and not enough on another. Absolutely. It is an imperfect institution. But it's not the government's job to spend the least amount of money possible. It's the government's job to do what the people of the country need the government to do. That's the government's job. It's a very general answer, but this notion that, well, smaller governments are better because they're less expensive. It's a libertarian fantasy. It's a childish, selfish way of looking at the world, to say, well, those smaller governments are better because they don't spend our money, they leave us alone. Bagser1, hi Steve. At the moment I'm going through a major writer's block, and I was wondering if you suffer from the same, and if so, do you have any tips or tricks to help overcome it? Thanks. Oh sure, I think every writer has writer's block from time to time. In my experience, the only thing is to just make yourself write. You just have to write your way through it. There are no tricks, there are no shortcuts, there's no, oh, I'll just go do this. There are no exercises to do. You just have to force yourself to write. And even if it's not what you're trying to write, if you're working on a particular project and you're just stuck, go write something else. Switch to something else. Write a completely different thing. If you're working on a piece of fiction, write something nonfiction. Write an essay about something. Write a memoir. Write about a memory or a dream. Just write something. Just get writing. Prime the pump, so to speak. And then just work your way through it. And when you get to the point where you can go back to that project you were blocked on, go back to it. But you just have to write your way through it. And sometimes it will feel like work. I mean, that's just, a lot of times, especially when we start writing, in our lives, when we sort of decide, oh, I like writing, I want to be a writer, we tend to romanticize it and see it as, oh, it's the creative process. It's this wonderful thing. The words just flow from your fingertips. And sometimes it does feel like that, and that's wonderful. But there are other times where it feels like fucking work. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's the way it is. Sometimes it is work. The trick is to make it not feel like work to the reader. But it may well be fucking hard-ass work for you. And when something like that happens, when you're blocked, the only thing I can tell you is just you got to grit your teeth and write through it. Checker222. Question: how do you handle door-to-door proselytizers? Religious folk coming to your door to try and convert you. I mean, debate, or just no thanks, or some other way? Thanks, love the channel. And Troubleshooter 125 also asked if I get many proselytizers. And the answer to that question is no, I don't really. I think the whole time I've lived here, I've only gotten, I think, 2 religious door knockers. And the way I handle them is, if I have time and if they seem like they're interested, I try to have a conversation with them. Not a debate, but a conversation. I let them give me their little sales pitch. Most of the time, I mean, they're used to having the door slammed in their face, so most of them are pretty good at giving you like a really quick, succinct pitch. And I let them do it, and then I ask them questions. And it's not a debate, and it's not like adversarial or hostile by any means, because I really enjoy it. But I just ask them questions. And I ask them, you know, well, why do you believe this? And what is your reason for this? And, you know, how did you get to this point? And blah, blah, blah. And if they have time to stand there and talk, it can be a really nice experience. I kind of enjoy it. I mean, I wish that they came around more often. I mean, I wouldn't want people knocking on the door selling their church every day. It would get old. I understand people who open the door and see a couple of Mormons standing there and go, oh, fuck, and just slam the door. I mean, I completely get that reaction, because it is kind of obnoxious. I mean, you can't just assume that the person on the other side of the door is going to be like me and will enjoy having a religious conversation with someone who is of a different persuasion than they are. You can't just assume that. I mean, a lot of people just don't fucking care and feel that it's an imposition. But in my case, I mean, like I say, if it's the right time, if I have the opportunity, and if the person is willing to engage me the way I want to engage them, it can be kind of fun. I kind of enjoy it. Precambrian Lullaby. Is there a particular genre of music that you find yourself gravitating towards? As I get older, I find myself less discriminate than I was when I was younger, but I always have a soft spot for music in the styling of that which I grew up with. Are you the same way? I am, I think. There are types of music, maybe not even genres of music, but just particular bands and artists that I got into when I was first like really seriously getting into music when I was a teenager. I mean, bands that a lot of people don't even remember now, that are like one-hit wonders that didn't really make much of an imprint, like the Verve Pipe. You know, I still love the Verve Pipe. I have all the Verve Pipe's albums, and I'll occasionally listen to them, and I just think that it's great. It's nostalgia mostly, but it's also, I mean, there are things about that music that I do really sincerely appreciate, and other things like that. In terms of genres of music, as I get older, I tend to gravitate more towards older stuff, to more essential stuff. Like I love the blues, because the blues is sort of an ancestor genre to a lot of different, more recent kinds of music. Here's one from Mark Weaver. As a counter to Serious Minds' question about your favorite 3 Star Trek episodes, what are your 3 least favorite Star Trek episodes? This is actually a lot easier than the favorites picking, and it's a broader cross section of the Star Trek franchise, I think. None of them are from the original series, because most of the bad episodes in the original series are at least sort of campy and enjoyable. Like a lot of people say Spock's brain. I can't really hate Spock's brain. I mean, yeah, it's awful, but it's so endearingly silly and stupid. I don't have it in me to not like that episode. So I would say there's an episode of, it's a 2-parter on Star Trek Voyager called Year of Hell that I absolutely hate, because it ends up being a complete waste of time. I mean, you guys who've watched me before have heard me talk about Star Trek and comic books. You know that I'm not really a canon person at all. Like, I really don't care about canon or what happened and what didn't happen. All I care about is a good story. But having said that, even I have my limits. And this is an episode, a 2-parter of Star Trek Voyager. 2 hours out of your life to watch this episode. And at the end of the second part, they hit the reset button and they undo everything that happened in the whole 2-hour episode. Everything goes back to the way it was. The 2 episodes are essentially completely worthless Nothing happens. The characters don't remember anything. The events that we watch never happened for the characters. There's zero progress made. It is a complete waste of time, these Year of Hell episodes. And not only that, I mean, that's the worst part about it, that it's lazy writing and it's just a total waste of time and it's a cop-out ending to just rewind everything back to the way it was and just go on as though the episodes didn't happen. That is really shitty. But in addition to that, as is usually the case with Voyager, the episode is also just really poorly executed. I mean, it's just the writing is really hammy, and Tuvok goes blind, I think, at one point, and gives this really, like, there's a point toward the end where Janeway is going to destroy the ship or something like that, and Tuvok gives this really, like, he sets up Janeway for this really corny speech, because Tuvok is the Vulcan. He's like, Captain, it is illogical to be so sentimentally attached to this ship. It is only a collection of bulkheads and engines and blah, blah, blah. And that's, the perfect opportunity for Janeway to give this sappy, fucking corny-ass speech about, oh no, Voyager is more than that. It's like a mother to us. It's nurtured us and kept us safe so far from home. Blah, 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 blah. Oh, God. Like, who would write this? Who would allow this to be put on television? It's so fucking horrible. A lot of people would say that the Voyager episode Threshold is worse, and that is a shitty-ass episode, but to me, Year of Hell is even worse. It's just awful. It's just awful, awful, awful. Next would be actually an episode of Deep Space Nine, which is overall my favorite Star Trek show, and it's the last episode of Deep Space Nine, What You Leave Behind, which is a nice title. But it's just a terrible episode, and the fact that it's the final episode of the show sort of magnifies its shittiness. It's a terrible example of a great show just dropping the ball, just completely fucking booting it in its last episode. This was an opportunity to really sum everything up and to have this great show, uneven but nonetheless great show, go out on a really strong note with a really emotional farewell, like Next Generation did with All Good Things. And it just blows it. It's just a terrible, disjointed, uneven, weird sort of episode that kind of ends about halfway through and then just sort of winds down for the last act. And it's like everybody sort of gets new jobs and goes away. There's a musical montage. I mean, it's like, what the fuck happened here? Just a terrible episode. But my least favorite episode in any Star Trek is an episode of Next Generation called Tin Man, which was a neat idea. I mean, the plot revolves around this spaceship that is also like a living organism, and it's been abandoned, and it's the last of its kind, and it's orbiting a star that is about to go supernova. Essentially, this one-of-a-kind organism is going to commit suicide, and the Enterprise encounters it and is, debating on whether or not to act to save it. And this new character comes in who is a telepath, a betazoid like Counselor Troy is, and who forms a connection, like a psychic connection with this alien organism. And it's just, I mean, it's a neat idea, but it's so poorly executed. The acting is just terrible. The writing is terrible. The plotting is terrible. Romulans just kind of show up for no fucking reason other than to give the Enterprise something to fight for the show. The regulars all look miserable. I mean, Marina Sirtis, who is usually a shitty actress, is like totally out to lunch. Patrick Stewart just looks irritated and pissed off as Picard, like for most of the episode. It's just bad. It's just Next Generation at its absolute worst. And it's always, whenever the subject of like worst or least favorite Star Trek episodes comes up, that's always the first one that pops into my mind is Tin Man. It's just an absolutely joyless episode. Claw Dragoons. How would you order 5 Stupid Things You Had to Ask, An Atheist Reads, and Now the Good News, and Riffing on Mail Call on a scale of how enjoyable they are to record? Well, the most enjoyable to record are the You Had to Ask. Because they're the easiest and they're the most diverse in terms of subject matter, and it's interactive with you guys, and I enjoy that, and they're just a lot of fun to do. The least enjoyable to make from start to finish are the 5 Stupid Things ones by far. I mean, There are times when doing those feels like work. I mean, writing them and shooting them and editing them, like there's just that whole process is definitely the least enjoyable. But those are also usually my favorite videos that I do. Like I really, really like those videos when they're finished, and they seem to get really good responses from people, and I get a lot of views. And that you know, there are people who came to my channel and were first introduced to me through those videos. So I mean, you know, they're well worth the effort. But yeah, they're by far the least fun to do. I mean, they're not fun to do at all. AIGG, I'm not sure how that's pronounced. Ig maybe? Egg? Hi Steve, which was the better decade for movies? The 90s or the aughts? For me, it's the 90s, for they were spared from a certain 11 Oscar trilogy. You know, I would go with the 90s too. Not that the first decade of the 2000s was a bad year for film, a bad decade for film at all, because it was a great decade for film. There were so many great movies released between 2000 and 2010. I mean, you know, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Lost in Translation, The Lives of Others, There Will Be Blood, No Country for Old Men. I mean, it just, and on and on and on and on and on. I mean, just so many great movies. So it was a great decade, man. But yeah, the 90s, shit, you know? The 90s, you had Quentin Tarantino coming onto the scene. You had Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction and Jackie Brown. You had Paul Thomas Anderson. I mean, the emergence of these just splendid directors in the 90s. Paul Thomas Anderson with his first volley of Hard Eight and Boogie Nights and Magnolia, one of my very favorite films. American Movie, one of my favorite documentaries. Just the year 1999 by itself was an outstanding year. Stanley Kubrick with his last film, Eyes Wide Shut, which I thought was just amazing. The 90s was, and don't forget, at the beginning of the 90s, it had Goodfellas. I mean, it was a great, great decade. I would go with the 90s as well. And I think I know what you mean by a certain 11 Oscar trilogy. Regular viewers of my stuff will know that I am not a fan of that particular trilogy. I think it is one of the most overrated works of cinema, based on one of the most overrated works of literature ever. I just am not a fan of it at all. If I never see it ever again, it will be too soon. It's not I'm not a fan of it at all. It's the one, you know, the one I'm talking about. It's the one with, you know, the little people, the you know, and the elves and the wizards, and it's all so serious and important, even though it's all incredibly stupid. I mean, you know, it has this air of just somberness and seriousness and gravitas, even though there's like old men with long white beards with staffs, and when they, you know, they touch them on the ground in this really important, emphatic way, like boom, and the thunder happens. It's like, I didn't even have the staff, and it happened. Well, I wonder if it'll happen again. Hang on. It's like this. No? Okay. There's just one, I guess. Anyway, you know what that means? It means that it's time for
the lightning round. Rapid fire questions. Glib and adequate answers.
Squall 6512. Which philosophers do you admire the most? And which school of thought within philosophy intrigues you? Thank you for your answer. Philosophers, probably Voltaire and David Hume. School of thought, probably empiricism, which is the philosophy that tells us that we need more than just philosophy to know what the fuck is going on. Mark Arangis, thanks for the answer, Steve. Here's one for the lightning round. You clearly love your cat, but how much would you say your cat loves you? I mean, who can tell with a cat, really? It's difficult. There are times when she seems kind of fond of me, or at least tolerant of me, you know, interested in me. But I also sort of know that if for some reason I were to die and lay undiscovered for a few weeks, whoever found me would find the cat curled up inside my hollowed out body cavity and purring contentedly with a belly full of me. I just know that would happen. Isaac Barlow, do you or have you ever done any speaking engagement like Kevin Smith? If not, would you ever consider it? Thanks. No, I never have. I've never been invited to do something like that. But yeah, of course I would consider it. That would be a lot of fun. IR138. Is your beard a member of the worldwide consortium of beards bent on world domination, or is it just a regular one? More to the point, how would you tell the difference? You don't know the difference. And that's the point. Bawd to Bits. Love your Q&As, great interaction, and always fresh. Question. Your house is on fire. Everyone is safe, and all your important documents and photographs have been saved. You dash back in to collect one thing that most people would tell you was a waste of time risking your life for. What is it and why? Hold on a second. Stuffy. Jester 101. Steve, have you seen the animated Batman film Batman Under the Red Hood? If yes, what were your thoughts on it? I thought it was shit. Shango02005. If you could only listen to 6 albums for the rest of your life, what would they be? Okay, I wrote them down because it was hard to think off the top of my head. But the 6 albums I would listen to, if I only could listen to those for the rest of my life, are Johnny Cash at San Quentin, Bruce Springsteen, Darkness on the Edge of Town, Neil Young and Crazy Horse, Rust Never Sleeps, Eric Clapton Unplugged, Billy Joel, Songs in the Attic, can't help it, and Nico K. Spock's Confessor Brings the Flood. Those are the 6 if I had to pick only 6. Oh. Jim Smith. Hey Steve, who are your top 5 directors? If you have any superfluous fucks to give, mine are Tarantino, Hitchcock, Kubrick, Scorsese, Coppola. My 5 would be Stanley Kubrick, Buster Keaton, Charlie Chaplin, Akira Kurosawa, and Werner Herzog. So there you go. If you have any extraneous fucks to give, have at it. Noisy Records. Even though he is responsible for some good things from Star Trek, do you think Rick Berman was responsible for the demise of Star Trek before the Abrams reboot? Yes. Dorian McLeod. Yeah, I got a question. What the hell is your problem with Meatloaf Jim Steinman songs? They suck. That's my problem with them. I just really think they suck a lot. That's it for the questions. Before I get out of here, let me do a shout out. The shout out this week, actually, you know what, Stuffy, since you're here, do you want to do the shout out? You handle the shout out here. This is the shout out. Go ahead, just read that. Okay. The shout out this week goes to Dan Courtney. He's the leader of the Upstate Atheists in New York, and he has a YouTube channel where he has a video of a nice long conversation he had with Cy Ten Bruggencate, and he talks about apologetics and presuppositionalism and stuff like that. So there you go. All right, there you go. Thanks, Stuffy. That is the shout out, Dan Courtney. He has a great channel. Very few subscribers, less than 1,000 subscribers at this point. And that interview with Cy Ten Bruggencate alone is worth some viewership and some interest. Interesting guy, interesting YouTube channel, well worth checking out. Thank you guys, as always, for watching me do this week. I will be back next week to do it again, assuming, of course, that you ask me some questions. Because in order for me to do this, you have to ask. I feel that's implicit in the title of the show. You have to ask for me to answer. So leave a comment on this video. Ask me anything about anything, and I will answer as many of your questions as I possibly can in the next episode. So until then, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Have a good week.